Farooq Leghari, Mr. Malik Miraj Khalid, and the Millat Party. And the third, which has just been launched in September, a general in particular, interactions with General Pervez Musharraf. So, looking at these three political memoirs, the hosts of the conference and I felt that perhaps we could have a discussion, an exchange of views, which would be particularly enriching because none of you have read the books, except maybe one or two misguided characters or gentlemen and ladies here. MashaAllah, this is very encouraging. There are at least 4 or 5 people here who have read, who have actually made the mistake of reading 1 or 2. None, I'm sure, have read all 3 books, and neither will you commit that error in the future. But even if you don't, I'm not making a protest or complaining. Never complain, never explain. Why write memoirs? जो आई गई बात गुजरी खत्म हो गई. Who cares? The past is the past. It's buried, dead, gone forever. Who cares? What we are much more concerned about is the present and the world of immediacy. आज क्या हो रहा है? आज की क्या ताज़ा खबर है? आज की क्या breaking news है? We are immersed in immediacy, and perhaps rightly so, because पहली बार इंसान की तारीख में इतनी भरपूर अंदाज में फौरी तौर पर इत्तलात फराहम होती है. So we can't blame humanity for being so preoccupied with what is happening minute to minute. Yet at the same time, the past matters. On an individual level, for all of us, the past matters. Who were our fathers, mothers, our ancestors? How did they live? Where were they born? How did they grow up? How did they nurture characters like us? That's in the immediate sense. But also in a larger sense, the sense of community or country into which they were born, how that influenced them, and they in turn passed on that influence to us. Sometimes we are conscious of that, and sometimes we just subconsciously absorb what has been passed on to us by the past, whether genetically through DNA or through acquired observation. So the past matters. The past actually never dies. We actually carry the past with us. Wherever we go, it's not exactly a burden unless you surrender to the burden, the baggage of the past, and become entrapped by it. And there is a danger of that. Without digressing from it. My parents divorced. Now, should I carry that baggage with me all my life here? Oh, thank you very much. So great. So great. Thank you for joining us. We are about to discuss your books. As a preliminary, I started by discussing my books. So, Dr. Huba Pakai. Very kind.
I'm talking to JJ.
As usual, you're very considerate. You're very nice.
But you know,
thank you for starting this off.
I was supposed to start this.
Very good.
So, a warm welcome to all of you. I see that the house is full, and now I know it's because of Javed Jabbar and not me. Because all of you were here even if I was not. It's I and Javed Jabbar go back a long way, and I don't feel that I am in any way competent enough to comment on his books or even be in conversation with him, because my first interaction was with him when I was asked to share a panel discussion with him, and the minute I saw his name I said I'm not coming because I just felt that I am not up to that mark, and I shared a table with him. And well, I went and I spoke, and I'm sure I did all the blunders that a young person does who thinks she's intellectually sound. And interestingly, Javed Jabbar walked over to me and he said, "Well done, Ladki." And since then, I've been a rascal. There's a Ladki then, and then I've been a rascal since. I am going to start off by talking to Javed Jabbar. Not the Javed Jabbar I know, the Javed Jabbar I discovered through these 3 memoirs that I read, and I've been honored enough, or I'm humbled by the fact that he's always kind enough to send them to me. फिर जब इनकी किताबों पे कमेंट आया, मैंने कहा जे फिर भेज दें. He said, क्या करूँ लड़की तुम्हारा? So I wanted to take a look at them again. So जे मैं आपसे बात शुरू करूँगी इस बात से कि आपने तो, जो आपकी सबसे आखिरी किताब है वहाँ से बात शुरू करेंगे. आपने तो एक पार्टी बनाई, कोशिश की, मिल्लत पार्टी, और फिर आप दीगर सियासी जमातों का हिस्सा बन गए. मिल्लत पार्टी का क्या हुआ? बिकॉज उसका मैनिफेस्टो जो था उसकी तो शायद आज बहुत ज़रूरत है.
Shukriya, Dr. Umar Bakai. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have you as the moderator and the host, and I forgive you for being late. That's okay. I'm a very forgiving person, and I really, but thank you so much. Your charm and your intelligence more than make up for the delay. But that's all right, perfectly all right. Thank you very much. And I want to just begin by clarifying that my last of the 3 memoirs is actually the book called A General in Particular. Usse pehle wo chhapi hai the book called A President, a Prime Minister and a Party. And contrary to the good wishes of yourself, I have not joined any party after setting up the Millat Party. Yeah. I decided that the way that party leadership decided to commit political suicide by arbitrarily deciding, without convening a meeting of the National Executive Committee and without informing the senior vice president, who happens to be this humble character, they decided arbitrarily in Lahore that it was time to merge the party with this very outstanding party called the PMLQ. And I was requested by Mr. Farooq Lighari, God bless his soul, I'm not saying this to defame him, he said, Javed, this is an emergency, please come to Lahore tonight, and we have to convene this and take a formal decision. I was basically outraged because I thought this was a violation of the fundamental principles of the party. We had founded the party in 2000, se bhi pehle, 1997, 1998, and within, I was Secretary General, and within 3 years we organized the party in such a way that in the first elections that we took part in the Musharraf period, 2002, the Millat Party won 10 seats in the 2002 elections. At the time when a certain young, aspiring political leader called Imran Khan, if you might have heard of him, won one seat. And he had already been at it earlier than us. So we won 10 seats. And in a coalition we had 16 seats. And I felt we could have eventually developed the party with our founding principles and our manifesto, which I had helped to write, into a reasonable force. But purely because of some extraordinary pressures, Mr. Lighari, in his infinite wisdom, decided to do that. So, normally, a person leaves a party. I am proud to say that in my case, my entire party left me. So, after experiencing this remarkable phenomenon, I decided no more parties. When you cannot rely on people who you have worked with and trusted, and not that I am cynical, I have not lost faith in human nature, but just for that purpose, I did not join any other party.
So party merging and party hopping is a norm.
I know.
It is an absolute norm. I mean, everybody who's around the famous IK you just spoke about has people from all other parties. If you trace the history of anybody who's in any party today, you will at least see 3.
But I mean, before the Millet Party, the only party I went into was the People's Party at the invitation of Benazir Bhutto Sahiba, who did not have a single member in the Senate. She was about to become Prime Minister and she direly needed representation in the Senate. I was elected as an independent. Our views coincided on many issues, so I became a member. Changing a party, Huma, is sometimes unavoidable. If the leadership of the party betrays the basic principles of integrity or ideology, I at least would not want to remain captive.
आप पार्टी में किसी में भी नहीं जा सकते.
No, I could not. I mean, I did not. I resigned from the PVP.
You resigned from
because
PVP.
because of the deviation from integrity at the time when she was Prime Minister the second time.
But interestingly, जावेद जब्बार साहब, आपने मिल्लत पार्टी से बिल्कुल इंटेग्रिटी पे अपने आप को अलहदा किया, बल्कि पार्टी ने आपको अलहदा किया. लेकिन उसके बाद आपने एक the best democrat probably we have in history, बेनज़ीर भुट्टो के साथ काम किया और फिर आपने एक डिक्टेटर के साथ काम किया. जी. तो फिर आपने पॉलिटिकल मोमाइज लिखी. बीबी का किताब है का जो नाम है वो है बट प्राइम मिनिस्टर. एक तो पहले बताइए कि ये बट प्राइम मिनिस्टर इसका नाम क्यों है, और फिर डेमोक्रेसी से इतना जुड़े हुए और फिर मुशर्रफ के साथ काम किया.
देखिए, बेनज़ीर भुट्टो साहिबा के साथ मुझे शर्फ हासिल हुआ फारूक लगारी साहब के साथ काम करने से पहले. आई वॉज इन द सेनेट. Benazir Bibi was about to become Prime Minister and she did not have a member in the Senate. So it would be very weird that a party is coming into power with no representation in the Senate. So I was not doing her a favor. I would not have joined any other party, but I did. Anyway, now the point is that we had a very good relationship, as I've discussed in the book. But there were times when it was very clear that the contradictory forces that she was facing, she was not able to transcend them fully. And I don't blame her because it was very unfair. She did not have the Punjab government with her. She did not have the army fully with her, only partly. Aslam Beg did support her becoming Prime Minister, but only on some conditions. She had Ghulam Isa Khan to deal with. So it was a very difficult situation. Within Sindh, in urban Sindh, she had MQM to deal with. So one felt very sympathetic to her. One wanted to help her. And yet at the same time, one was horrified by some of the deviations from integrity that she permitted to take place.
But you also very beautifully capture her first address to a very hostile Senate.
Well, yeah, I had been persuading her to come to the Senate, which was elected before she became Prime Minister. So it was largely pro-Zia, pro-Muslim League people. And she was unduly nervous and apprehensive for a person of such self-confidence. I was very surprised why she avoided meeting the Senate face to face. So finally, after about 14 months of persuasion, she finally decided to accept my advice and come and make a speech, and she was welcomed warmly, contrary to that. In your previous question, you said you worked with a dictator. You know, these compartmentalizations of people into Democrats and dictators is somewhat unfair. Civilians are also capable of being very authoritarian, dictatorial. Within their parties, there is no scope. If you challenge the leader, oh boy, you are committing heresy, and that is dictatorial, because parties never hold authentic, fair elections in their own parties. That is a sign of dictatorship.
So you believed in Musharraf's enlightened moderation?
No, and also I think General Musharraf was a more democratically inclined individual than several civil democrats I've met. He was willing to accept dissent within the cabinet. Several times we disagreed. The reason why I resigned eventually is different, but to be fair to him, and look at the fact that even after I resigned, and when I kept reminding him to pass the law to introduce private electronic media, which is a sign of democracy, which you enable people to express different points of view, he actually followed through.
I will come to that क्योंकि उसके लिए आपने बीवी से भी कहा था.
क्या बीबी से भी कहा था और नवाज शरीफ से भी कहा था, and neither of them civil elected political democrats were willing to allow private media in Pakistan. So it took an unelected military dictator, so-called dictator, and he was a dictator in some ways, but a very democratic person, to actually introduce this whole transformation of the media landscape.
Your book is also called A Tale of How Power Drove Apart Two Friends. You are very critical of the general in the book.
I know, it was a very difficult decision. How should I write this book? If I only think of him as a friend, as a former friend, as a renewed friend, should I deliberately overlook some parts and conceal them from public scrutiny? Should I say it and offend him? That was a dilemma. I finally decided that the public interest is much larger than one's personal relationship. And as long as I'm being truthful, at least I think I'm being truthful. He may have another view and he's welcome to contradict it. I owe it to the people. Halanki the people, mashallah, will never read the book. Kya baat hai dekhen? I mean, encouragingly, only 4 hands have gone up so far. Oh, absolutely, I'm very encouraged. Out of whatever 70, 80 people, 5 people have actually made the mistake of reading it. Chalo, pad lena, abhi nahi to agle janam mein pad lena. But the point is that I owe it to history, because history is important. So, one wrote, regardless of whether one was a friend or not a friend, and I have written both critically and empathetically. When he was wrongly charged with treason, I wrote in Dawn twice saying this charge of treason, as traditionally defined, is absolutely untenable.
Let me come back
not committed treason.
Let me come back to Benazir Bhutto.
Ji.
How many years it have been?
How many?
How many years that you knew Bibi? 20 plus?
Yeah.
And worked with her closely?
Worked with her closely for only about 6 years.
6 years. You knew her well.
Pardon?
You said you would say you knew her well.
As well as one can. I was not a Giala. Sometimes I was part of what is called the kitchen cabinet. Very few people who she consulted. Often I was not, because I was not a Giala, and I was not able to raise those slogans which are part of the standard party criteria to define whether you are a Giala or you are not a Giala. So she knew that. But to her, be fair to her, she did not discriminate against me because I was not a Giala.
So you worked with her and you probably first-hand witnessed the musical chairs that happened in the political history of Pakistan. Whose fault? And what did it do to our politics?
Gee, I mean, you know, musical chairs are a situation of particularities. Look at the situation she was facing. First of all, she made the fundamental error after winning the elections in November 1988. She had the largest number of seats. Khurshid Hadi, who was also a political activist, even though he's a professional chartered accountant, he and I visited Benazir Bhutto at Bilawal House soon after that, 19th, 20th of November. And we said, Bibi, you have to go immediately to Lahore and mobilize support so that the People's Party is able to form a government in
You
Punjab.
convinced her to go to Lahore?
No, tried to. I mean, I bluntly told her the way to Islamabad is not from Karachi to Islamabad, it is via Lahore. So don't waste any day here. You've got a secure number of seats in Sindh. Go to Lahore. And to our shock, Benazir Bhutto did not want to go to Lahore. She was fully confident that the Punjab leadership would mobilize the independent MPAs who were not already with Nawaz Sharif to give her support. depending on Farooq Lagari, Salman Taseer and others. And that did not happen. What did happen was that Nawaz Sharif, using various means, was able to form a majority. And that created the biggest obstacle to her being able to function effectively as a Prime Minister.
What led, you see, Lahore to Islamabad is now a mantra. And IK and others, everybody who wants a seat in the federal cabinet will know, okay, it's through Punjab.
Right.
Why Bibi?
Why BB too? Quite right. Perhaps nostalgically she was thinking of her beloved father, because in 1970 the irony was that Zede Bhutto, thoroughly from Sindh, won more seats in Punjab than he did in Sindh. So she had the notion that PPP has a natural right to Punjab, without realizing that the whole demography of Punjab had changed. A new mercantile class and a mentality had arisen, which was no longer part of the Sindh ethos or the ethos of Zede Bhutto. The years of Ziaul Haq and a few years of Nawaz Sharif were reflective of a socio-economic change that had taken place in Punjab. A new urban phenomenon had arisen. So, unfortunately, despite her intelligence and her perception, she, in my humble view, did not recognize that and then had to pay the price. Because for 20 months of her government, Punjab was constantly hostile to her.
The book that you wrote on Bibi was published in 2021. How did her assassination hit you? What was it like? We knew her from a distance. It shook all us up. How did Bibi's assassination hit you?
Like a thunderbolt. It was so devastating. Even though I was very unhappy with some aspects of her policy, it literally, one broke down because I just was too saddened by her loss.
Javed Jabbar sir, did you see it coming?
Yeah, I felt...
I'd like you to talk about that.
Well, yeah, I think that she did not take seriously enough what happened in Karachi. But more intriguingly, what amazed me was that General Musharraf, the much maligned General Musharraf, on the night before sends his DG-ISI, his own DG-ISI, to meet Benazir Bhutto and to tell her, please Bibi, do not go tomorrow afternoon to that meeting, because inexcusably General Musharraf had also withdrawn the normal protocol and safety afforded to all former Prime Ministers. This was unforgivable on his part, whether it was done with his knowledge or without his knowledge. But yet, to his credit, he sent his DG-ISI asking her not to go. And yet she defied that. She not only defied that advice, she defied her own party's safety protocols, which said you will not rise and wave to people from your SUV because you will be exposing yourself. She violated that. And then her own party's security policy was violated by the head of that security unit called Mr. Rahman Malik, who, instead of keeping his vehicle strictly behind Benazir Bhutto's vehicle, left the venue before the assassination and sped away to Islamabad. And despite hearing on the way that bullets have been fired, Benazir is injured, he did not turn back and come back to find out what was happening. So it is inexplicable how a combination of factors combined to lead to her tragic death. And to this day, as you know, neither the UN investigation nor Pakistan's own investigation have unearthed the real reasons.
So perhaps it's not just Bibi. We have in our politics what we call the politics of elimination. Liaqat Ali Khan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's judicial murder, Bibi's assassination attempt on Imran Khan. So that's quite a lot in 70 years.
Absolutely.
So what's your comment on that? You've been on the front row.
No, I know. It's a way. It's a politics in Pakistan is a dangerous business. But to be fair, not that it happens with the same frequency. In the absolute, almost polar opposite of Pakistan, a country called Sweden, where you do not associate violence with political office, you have Olaf Palme, the Prime Minister, walking along a street being assassinated simply for offending someone's view. So assassination is a risk inherent to political office. It can happen in Reagan's case, it can happen in J.F. Kennedy's case, it can happen in India, it can happen with Mahatma Gandhi.
Yes, but do you think it has
Sri
a
Lanka.
certain particularity in our case or in South Asian politics? European politics, American politics is different. In the South Asian context, this politic of elimination, where perhaps dissent is not tolerated.
Right, quite right. Here, unlike other places perhaps, it is more organized, more systemic rather than the act of an individual. There you can blame some individuals for being sarfira, for being mad or extremist. Here the indications are that there are systemic forces that consciously organize these attempts to assassinate people. You asked me earlier, why did I call this book But Prime Minister?
Yes.
The credit for the title goes to Mr. Salim Abbas Gilani, who was Cabinet Secretary during the tenure in which I served. And when he heard that I was writing this book, he of his own accord very graciously suggested that you should call this book But Prime Minister. I said, why? He said, well, of all the cabinet members who I used to listen to while the cabinet meeting were taking on, you were the only one who often said but Prime Minister. Most of the others said yes, Prime Minister. So I said thank you very much for remembering, but only not because नहीं मैं इसमें अपनी अच्छाई को खातिर नहीं कह रहा, मैं सिर्फ ये अर्ज कर रहा हूँ. I felt it is my duty to disagree with the head of government in cabinet, not to have one-on-one conversations. That was the strategy others used to avoid embarrassing her. But I felt embarrassment is a small price to pay. A leader must have the capacity to listen to dissent and not hold it against someone, and to learn from that. A leader is not all wise and all powerful. In Britain, a Prime Minister is the first among equals. First among equals.
So was Bibi a listening leader?
Often. Yeah,
Often,
she was.
yes.
To be
So
fair, she
the
was.
most
She was.
interesting section that I found in the book is towards the end, where JJ recounts a meeting with Benazir Bhutto in Damascus in June 2022, where she talks, June 2000,
yeah.
can't be 20, where she talks to him about her perceptions of her time in power. आपसे थोड़ी इन्होंने दिल की बातें की, आपसे क्यों की? क्योंकि where was that confidence? आपने सिर्फ 6 साल उनके साथ काम किया था.
I know.
और सबसे striking बात उस conversation की क्या थी? ये कोई किताब पढ़िए ना पढ़िए, ये section पढ़िएगा.
Well, I mean, one would want them to read every word of it, but also they should read that chapter, brief chapter, Tears Soon After the Cheers, because here was a strong, well-educated, self-confident woman, and symbolizing the capacity of Pakistani women to rise to high levels of extraordinary achievement. And yet in that brief episode where she called me in for some consultation in the National Assembly, as I've recorded in the book, with only Nahid Khan present, I was so moved by the fact that she was actually crying. And she was crying because
बीवी रो रही थी.
because she could not take the terrible vituperation being hurled against her, against Nusrat Bhutto, against her father in the National Assembly debates by, among other people, a certain gentleman who is today still prominent, Sheikh Rashid Ahmed, and Maulana Fazlur Rahman and others who were going at it hammer and tongs to, so that actually, probably devastated her, because to listen to that kind of poison directly is a different experience altogether. And you can't ask someone to shut up because there's complete freedom of expression in the National Assembly and complete immunity.
इसमें कितना हिस्सा इस बात का था कि बीवी औरत थी, सिर्फ सियासतदान नहीं थी.
True. I think, but she, to her credit, she handled the femininity of being a woman with exceptional grace and self-confidence and dignity, tremendous dignity. To her great credit, she was surrounded by a male chauvinist kind of ethos, which is historical in Pakistan. But she had people like Nahid Khan there to hold her hand, and she had some other women also, her mother was there. But by her own self, she was a very self-possessed woman. And when I was party to talks that she held with the US President or with the visiting Prime Minister of India or Japan or elsewhere, that self-confidence and assurance did not falter. Even in America, where one knew that she was to their faces telling them something about the nuclear weapons program, which actually was not true. But she had to keep a straight face, and she had to say, we are not making any nuclear weapons. But we knew, she knew that that was happening for the sake of Pakistan's security.
आपका कोई किरदार था बीबी और मुशर्रफ की बातचीत शुरू कराने में? कोई मशवरा आपने किसी को दिया था इस हवाले से?
Well, I mean, I can't claim any credit for that, except that my contact with Benazir, that 2-hour dialogue I held with her in Damascus, was the first time that there was a contact between a cabinet member of Musharraf and Benazir. And it was completely conveyed to General Musharraf. And it was General Musharraf, I think, he made a lapse of judgment by delaying his response to her message, that she was willing to engage in dialogue. And he said that to me, and I've recorded it in the book. He said, Javed, just let it be, leave it with me. Which was fine. I couldn't force him to do it. I conveyed to him exactly what she had said. So that, I think, was an error committed by Musharraf. But to be fair to Musharraf, he knew that all she was asking for was the NRO. And at that time, Musharraf was not in a frame of mind to even consider that. That was 2000, 2001. He finally came around to it in 2006, 2007. But before that, he had decided not to compromise.
So were you friends with General Musharraf?
Yes, we were friends, and I hope we still are. I wish him well. He is in a very indelicate, infirm condition, and we pray for his well-being. But I regard him as a friend, and I hope he does.
Did the power drove the two of you apart?
Yeah. Power certainly changed him. Not entirely for the worse. He never lost his good manners, his civility, but something within him had become too comfortable with power. And when you become that comfortable with power and the unwillingness to see any end to that power, which is what he suffered from. I've written in the book, I gave him a strategy in May that you should conclude your term exactly 3 years from the date you took over, as per the Supreme Court. Hand over power to a civil political process. Take 2 years off, so that you, after you retire from the army, and devote your time to public service. Then come back, and I was humbly confident that people would appreciate that. A general willingly giving up power and coming back would have been much more credible than someone insisting on staying on. So he didn't agree with that.
So were you in some ways a bridge between the civilian general, the face to the public, and the military general? Did you help him there with that often?
I tried to. In fact, with us is a gentleman, Sayyid Javed Iqbal, who had the distinction of conducting the first interview General Musharraf gave after becoming chief executive, and he and Mehnaz conducted that interview, and you might want to ask Sayyid Javed Iqbal for his
अभी
perception.
सवाल पूछेंगे तो
हाँ
जल्दी
जी
से पूछ
बिल्कुल
लेंगे.
पूछ लेंगे.
I don't know how much time we have.
But
but-
we have less time than you think, so we
Okay.
better go to this long suffering audience
Long-suffering
बेचारे
audience.
ये
एक
बेजुबान
सवाल
बैठे हुए हैं.
एक
जी.
सवाल